Hello, my name is Canyon Schubert. Welcome to my GIT 335 project. I have chosen to do mine on cryptocurrencies, just because I find them interesting, even though before this project I had absolutely no idea like what they were, because cryptocurrencies are very conceptual. Um, Still, after this project, I would say that I don't fully understand them, but I definitely have a better grasp on the concept than when the project started. Um, I got bits of info from different places while looking and researching this project. Mostly just pieced together my idea of what cryptocurrencies are in my head, and from several videos and articles. Those videos and articles I have put in my bibliography slide at the very end. With that said, let's get right into this. So, what are cryptocurrencies? For my project, I will focus mostly on Bitcoins, but for this side, I'll try to stay just to cryptocurrencies. Um, they are similar to real money. They pretty much operate off of faith in the system. Real money currently, if we take the US dollar for example, is backed up by gold in the US Reserve, but that's not really the case anymore. It's more or less just pieces of paper that people give to each other in the sense of saying that if I had a $5 bill and I gave it to somebody, they're just expecting that that's worth this concept of $5. Well, and if I gave 10 bitcoins to somebody, it's them saying that, oh, I now have 10 bitcoins. That's essentially what it is. Um, it's just conceptual, and if there's no faith in the system that it doesn't work, then there would be no currencies, period. Um, Cryptocurrencies are digital currencies, so as opposed to being physical money, it's all online. It's all managed from the web digitally, that kind of stuff. Um, Mostly, they require complex cryptographic algorithms, which can be solved by computing, and those are used to exchange the coins and to generate. And more coins are generated in the process. Um, Although exchanging coins might just seem as easy as like pressing a button from your Bitcoin wallet to say, "Oh, hey, I want to send, I don't know, Jack 10 Bitcoins." There's a lot going on behind the scenes that uh, includes yeah, includes cryptographic algorithms and such um, that keep everything in place. Because since there's no centralized, I'll get into that more. But since there's no centralized bank and nobody keeping track of everything, um, there needs to be cryptographic keys and such keeping it in order. Um, On to the next one. This is just going to be going over Bitcoin, just kind of the basics of it. So it was created in January of 2009 by a man named Satoshi Nakamoto. Um, Bitcoin was made as an economic system that doesn't have to revolve around a centralized bank, or it doesn't revolve around a centralized bank. Um, this foregoes bank transaction fees, so when you make a transaction, there aren't any fees. I believe there are actually small fees now, very like minute fees, and there will be more in the future, but again, I will get into that shortly. Since it doesn't revolve around a centralized bank, um, it's up to all of the users as a collective to keep everything in line, up to date, make sure that the system is working properly. Now, to get into it, Bitcoin, they're not, it's like if you have a dollar bill, you can say, oh, I have X amount of dollars, they're right here in my hand. Well, for Bitcoins or cryptocurrencies, you can't exactly just say, oh, I have 10, it's right here. Um, if you have your Bitcoin wallet, you could say, oh, I have some right here, and it makes sense. But Bitcoin itself it's just a ledger, per se. It's got a bunch of account names, and then next to that account name, it would have the amount of Bitcoins you have. So my account name, it wouldn't say Canyon, it would be a big like hash of numbers and letters. And then next to it, let's say I had 20 Bitcoins, it would just have a 20. If I were to pay somebody 20 Bitcoins, the transaction would just minus 10 from that. So I'd be down to 10 right next to my name, and the person I gave them to would be up to 10 plus whatever they had previously. Um, this ledger it's not like a physical thing either. It's purely digital and conceptual, and it's maintained by a bunch of people. Um, the number, like Bitcoins themselves, and the number that you have, they only, it's since it's conceptual, the only meaning that you have in actual worth there is belief that the number that's there is worth something. Kind of like if all of a sudden the US dollar tanked in value, um, that $5 I have, suddenly it's not worth anything anymore. I could just rip up the piece of paper and it's worth nothing. The only reason why that $5 bill that I have is worth something is because I believe it's worth something. If suddenly all of America switched to a different uh, economic system, then it wouldn't be worth anything anymore, and that $5 would be completely worthless to me. With the Bitcoin system, everyone oversees the ledger, um, or everyone can oversee the ledger. Um, More basic users generally don't, but because they're only using it to send Bitcoins to, just small transactions. But a lot of users will keep their own copy of the ledger. They will update it. Um, Obviously, that is a lot more in depth, but I have a slide after talking about altcoins that will be more in depth. Bitcoins as themselves, yeah, they're just the most successful cryptocurrency and the most popular. That's why I'm going to focus on them in this presentation. But uh, this is just Bitcoins on a basic level. And I want to go over altcoins before I get more in depth about how Bitcoins and cryptocurrencies tend to work. So here we have some altcoins. Across the top in order, the images are Dogecoin, Ripple, Litecoin, and Ethereum. I haven't looked into too many of them. The only one that I've looked into enough to be able to talk about it in this presentation is probably Dogecoin, just because I thought it was a joke at first, and I thought it'd be an interesting thing to look into. Altcoins are virtually, they're just, that description of altcoin is just any cryptocurrency other than Bitcoin. And they have different uses, but it mostly just boils down to 2 or 3 different usages. The first one would be hedging against a Bitcoin like meltdown catastrophe kind of thing. Similarly to how if like the Great Depression for the U.S. economy, if something like that were to happen with Bitcoin, having your money invested into a different altcoin, which may then be on the rise, would be beneficial to you. Similarly, how to if you had U.S. dollars, investing in gold or something more something with a more solid value would be beneficial to you if we went into another Great Depression. Another use for an altcoin would be a niche thing, which here's where I can talk about Dogecoin. Dogecoin is essentially an altcoin with a niche purpose. Dogecoin was primarily used to tip other people online. Like, if they did something nice for you or whatever, you would just tip them in Dogecoin, which had value to those people. Blah, 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 that kind of stuff. The reason why I say was is because Bitcoin, the reason why it's the most popular and most successful is because, especially in this case, with altcoins that have niche effects, Bitcoin can pretty much do exactly what they do, just better and easier. Since Dogecoin was just used to tip other people, it's just transactions of small amount of money. And with Bitcoin, you can do that exact same thing, but it's easier and more people use Bitcoin, so why would you use a lesser known system to do something that's easier with Bitcoin and more people use it? It's more widely accepted. Then we can get into the other one, which is future utility. People will invest in altcoins because of their future utility, because they think that this altcoin has something that Bitcoin doesn't, and in the future it'll become bigger than Bitcoin, and it'll take over the top of the market of cryptocurrencies. If that happens, which I personally think it'd be unlikely to happen, but if it did happen, the person that would have invested in those altcoins would then suddenly be rich, kind of like how people who invested in Bitcoin back in 2009 would be now. Oh, excuse me. Um, the examples of the altcoins, as I already went over, are Dogecoin, Ripple, Litecoin, Ethereum. There are so many more. I just put those four on here because I think that they're four of the most common altcoins. Um, Generally, to people that know cryptocurrencies, they will know all four of these. Their purpose is all of those. There are plenty other. While searching them up online, I saw images that had like, I mean, I want to say hundreds, but I don't know if it was that many. It was at least 20 little images of different types of cryptocurrencies, and it's amazing because I didn't even know anything about Bitcoin, let alone how many of all these other ones there are. When it boils down to it, though, um, Bitcoin is pretty much just better than altcoins for the most part. I mean, that's kind of like a controversial thing, but that's why Bitcoin is so successful and so popular, and why I'm taking that as my main focus in this presentation, is because Bitcoin, it just tends to overshadow every other altcoin. But these do exist, they are out there, they represent other cryptocurrencies. They are important to know if you want to learn more about cryptocurrencies. So now we can move on to Bitcoin in depth. Um, there are obvious concerns surrounding Bitcoin. Um, it's almost the same worries that come with real money. What's to stop people from changing the ledger whenever they want? Um, add money to their account, take money away from other people. Um, what's to stopping people from taking, like, just stealing coins, like minusing other people's number in the ledger and just adding it to their own? Um, and what if something isn't up to date and someone uses money that isn't there anymore? For instance, let's say if there's like a network connection delay when you're buying something from your Bitcoin wallet, and you could effectively, if Bitcoin's defense mechanism wasn't in play, um, using or abusing a network delay, you could buy two things for, let's say, 100 Bitcoins, even though you only have 100, because you're just sending two people 100 at the same time, and it arrives at different times. Hopefully that makes sense about the worry. Um, but as I said, Bitcoin does have defense mechanisms, or just generally some things that work with Bitcoin itself, against the majority of the concerns that are brought against it. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's the most successful cryptocurrency. Um, when a transaction is sent, there is a transaction message. That message will contain the sender's name, their user ID, account name, the one that is like a hash of letters and numbers. It will contain that. It will contain the receiver's account name, that hash. It will contain the amount that you are sending, or they are sending, and it will also contain a signature per se. This signature is fairly complex and complicated when it comes down to it. It is unique for each transaction, and it includes some sort of cryptographic function that includes the sender's name, the receiver's name, the amount, and the key. Each user has a key that is specific to them, and that message will also use that key to encrypt it. So, if a transaction message can be decrypted successfully by the receiver, that would mean that the person that sent it had the valid signature. It is the proper person that actually sent it, and not some criminal that's just changing money from someone else's account. Then Bitcoin also has maintainers, and those maintainers are the more involved users in Bitcoin that keep the ledger up to date. They keep updated copies of the ledger. Unlike, like I said, the more casual users who might just be like trading Bitcoins to their friends and stuff like that, just small transactions. These maintainers receive transaction messages that update their ledger whenever anybody makes a transaction with a valid signature. When they receive this transaction message, they can add it to the transaction chain or the blockchain, and that transaction message is called a block. And them adding this transaction to the thing is essentially a vote on which maintainer's ledger is the correct version across all of them. Because obviously, if each maintainer is creating a ledger, like I said, with network connectivity problems and such, or network delays, each maintainer could necessarily have a different ledger depending on when the transaction showed up and all that. So, continuing on with more in depth, each transaction to put it onto each transaction when it's made is put into a pool of pending transactions, and these pending transactions can only be put on the blockchain after solving a math problem, which is kind of like a small little puzzle. These math problems, once it's solved, is kind of like using a vote. That is your vote to which ledger is the proper and most up-to-date one. Now, because these are math problems and they require computing power to solve, they aren't just like problems that are solved by hand. They use cryptographic functions, algorithms, and all that. So you need computing power and electricity, all of that, to solve these problems. Since computing power can cost a lot of money, and as we've seen with Ethereum mining, not necessarily Bitcoin, but Ethereum, GPU prices have risen because of this, because people want to mine more and more. Well, this is essentially the same thing with Bitcoin mining. It is a way to keep one person from outvoting the majority. Because if one person came in and they wanted their version of the ledger, let's say they're an evil person and they put like billions of Bitcoins into their account and then none in anybody else's, and they wanted to send out that version of the ledger and say, I am the majority, even though they're only one person, they would need billions and billions of actual dollars to have the computing power necessary to solve enough math problems to become the majority in that case, which keeps bad people like that from becoming the majority, and what keeps the ledger updated and valid across everybody's accounts, so to speak. When a puzzle is solved, the person who solved it is granted bitcoins that are essentially generated from nothing, out of thin air. They are just given bitcoins for solving that puzzle and putting another thing on the transaction chain. This is where the term Bitcoin mining comes from. Like I was talking about with the computing power, the more computing power you have, the more bitcoins you generate from solving these transaction puzzles. And you're essentially just gaining free money from having your computer run these algorithms and the cryptographic functions. That generation of bitcoins out of thin air is believed to end by 2140, because obviously you can't just continue generating. It would be kind of like printing money in the U.S. economy. You can't just keep printing money and giving it to everybody. That's not how it works. The system kind of like loses how it works. No one has faith in the system if you can just print money and give it away, that kind of stuff. You can't have infinite bitcoins or infinite money circulating the economy. That just doesn't work. So, these bitcoins that are generated, the Bitcoin mining, is the incentive to help keep the proper ledger, which helps keep the Bitcoin system intact. It makes sure, like, since you are granted bitcoins for correctly solving the transaction chain the blocks and putting them on the blockchain, then not only do you get another vote to which one is the proper ledger, you also get bitcoins. It basically just says, if you help maintain this ledger the way it should be, then you get money to do it. It's almost like getting paid to do a job. Once the generation of Bitcoin stops for Bitcoin mining, there will be transaction fees. I know that this is the one thing that I'm not 100% sure about Bitcoin, since they want to avoid transaction fees from using a centralized bank, but then they're going to stop Bitcoin generation and transaction fees will be put in place as a mining incentive instead. I think from a lot of the things that I saw, it's going to be a very, very small fee, but I don't know necessarily how that works. That's something I would definitely like to look into more of, because I feel like that's where the system starts to crumble, is when there isn't as much as an incentive to mine and keep a proper ledger, or alternatively when people don't want to send transactions because there's a fee involved. But that is obviously over 100 years away, so we can deal with that when the time comes. These puzzles and the votes that you get, or the votes that you cast essentially for solving the puzzles, they will add, like, those are the things that add the transaction to the blockchain from the pending transaction pool and keeps the ledger up to date and valid. So that solving the puzzles, Bitcoin mining, keeps everything up to date. It awards an incentive for keeping it up to date. Basically, it just rewards you for being good and making sure that only proper transactions get on the thing, and everybody's system, their ledger is equal. Everybody has the same thing in front of them. Everybody knows who has X amount of Bitcoins or which account name, because you don't know the person who owns the account because it's just letters and numbers, which account name owns how many Bitcoins, that kind of thing. It basically just makes sure that everything is correct and up to date. So I've done a lot of talking so far from the slides and such. I would like to go kind of just freely talk right now about some stuff that I've discovered while researching this project and such. My personal thoughts on Bitcoin, I've tried to add them in as I'm talking, but I think that Bitcoins are good. I think the cryptocurrencies as a whole are good. I've thought for a pretty long time in reference to the U.S. economy that dollar bills are becoming like outdated. They only have worth because we give them worth. Stuff like the penny, for instance, it costs more to make than it's actually worth, so why would we make them? That kind of stuff. I think Bitcoin, while maybe not necessarily being a total replacement for actual physical money, I think that it's a really good step up, and I think that it's definitely good to run side by side with it at the very least. Um, yeah, I don't have too much to say on whether or not it could replace physical money, just because it's something that I want to continue researching, because I feel like I've only just scratched the surface, even researching just for this project, and I feel like there's so much more to learn. But I definitely think that it's a good thing, and I think that having alternate systems, it's kind of like different economic systems, like how $1 is worth, and I'm just gonna throw out a number because I don't know the exact conversion, but like is worth maybe like $2 Canadian. It basically means that my money is worth more in Canada when I transfer it over like that. Bitcoins can also be, um, I don't like translated into U.S. dollars like that, and I think that that's good because it's essentially just another type of economy. It's like U.S. dollars, Canadian dollars, um, euros, pounds, bitcoins. Like they're all just. It's like a. But this is like a universal currency. You can go to any country and use it, because the ledger is global to anybody that's using Bitcoin. So I think that could be good. I think it also opens up a lot more security issues, but I'll get to that in just a second. So the trouble in understanding Bitcoin, I think, is just that it's not like a physical thing. Bitcoin itself is literally just a ledger that has numbers and account names, and you have X amount of Bitcoins because this number is next to your name in the ledger. There is no physical coins. You can't like go and be like, oh, I have. I mean, you can in the wallet. You can say like, oh, I have like 20 Bitcoins, but itself, like the entire system is just kept with like a ledger that, oh, you actually have 20 Bitcoins. When you give it to somebody else, it just updates the global ledger. It's it's really hard to just conceptualize that itself. Just doing that took me like several days just to like wrap my head around the fact that everything is not a central like bank that says I have this amount of money. It's just every single person has a ledger that says you can only spend 20 bitcoins because you only have 20 bitcoins, and every person as a whole can do that, not just one centralized entity. Um, I think the good place to start understanding Bitcoin is pretty much right there. I think learning the basics is pretty much the best part you can go to. Just learn right then and there what the ledger is, how it works. You don't even really necessarily need to learn how things are updated. Maybe just learn about mining so you can get started in that. I'm not sure if you should go in and just buy Bitcoins or mine them. I'm not really sure which is worth more. I think going out and spending your real money to mine Bitcoins without knowing an extensive amount about them is probably the wrong way to go about it. But um, I definitely think you should just buy a couple. If you're looking to get into it, you should just buy a couple first and then look into mining later once you understand more about Bitcoin. Also, Bitcoin is peer-to-peer, which is a trade-off because there's less transaction fees and such, etc. But there's also less protection, and as we can tell with the ledger being maintained to upvote, maintained to voted to be kept up to date. Um, Another thing is that the solving the ledger or putting your votes in is essentially like a race. The majority that has the quote unquote correct ledger will get the most votes because it's adding the most things to the chain, and that majority will solve the vote race for which ledger is the majority and gets to be the updated version more often than not because there are more people working towards solving that puzzle. Um, but there is less protection because there are obvious protection concerns. Even though I have talked about how Bitcoin combats them, it's still like, oh, it's just a digital currency. That's hard to keep in mind. Um, yeah, so as a summary to this project, I think cryptocurrencies are very difficult to understand just because you have to conceptualize a lot. There is no physical, oh, like as if you could say, I have 2 pennies. You can't say, oh, look, here, I have 2 Bitcoins. It doesn't really work like that. It's a lot more conceptual and more just difficult to understand. I think learning the basics it's not too difficult to learn the very like bare minimum basics, and it's a huge step up from having little to no prior knowledge on the subject, like myself. Um, I definitely think it puts me in a good place to start to continue learning about them and maybe even invest in some. I think that Bitcoins and other cryptocurrencies are very good compared to physical money. Um, and at the same time, the problems that have arisen that could affect Bitcoin security reason and blah blah. Just the way that I could hold up $2 and it could just get snagged out of my hand, and it's like, oh, I just got robbed. I don't have that $2 anymore. Those are kind of like the same concerns for Bitcoin, except I think Bitcoin's a little bit more secure even because nobody can just walk right up and just take my money away. They'd have to go through some really complex algorithms and such that can only be solved by computers, so they would have to have the necessary computing power, etc., to do so. Um, I think the Bitcoin's more secure than that. I don't know if it would take off and eventually replace physical money, as I've said, but I think that it could definitely come close, and I think that it's in the future that we're leading up to. It's a possibility that everybody should be looking into that might happen. Um, that just about wraps up my presentation. Um, I've definitely learned a lot about crypto or huh, cryptocurrencies in this, not necessarily in this course, but doing the project. Um, I'm glad that the lectures talked about them a little bit because I really did enjoy hearing just that little bit of outside insight to get me started on this. Um, yeah, it's definitely a subject that I want to continue learning about because, like I said, I think I've barely scratched the surface, and I have researched several articles and stuff. Here they are, articles and such, about how Bitcoins works and all that. But yeah, that concludes my presentation. Thank you for watching, and I hope to learn more about Bitcoin. So if you have if I got anything wrong or anything in this video, if I was misunderstanding something, please leave that in the comments or the feedback because I would seriously love to learn so much more about this. Thank you for watching.